Some in the West call him the American professor. Some of his critics call him the new PR weapon of the Iranian government. He's a close advisor to Iran's President Hassan Rouhani and at the forefront of a new openness for direct talks on the Iranian nuclear program. Welcome to the Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Mr. Mohammad Javad Zarif. Sir, we are very happy to have you here. Thank you.
I'm very happy to be with you. Thank you.
Und willkommen auch Ihnen, liebe Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer, beim Kamingespräch von Phoenix aus dem Adlon Hotel in Berlin. Minister Zarif, since the interim agreement on the nuclear question was announced in November last year, the biggest question on people's mind was actually, can Iran be trusted? Today at the Munich Security Conference, you basically said you want honest negotiations. Can Iran be trusted?
I think we have a problem of trust, but it's on both sides. The Iranian people do not trust the West because they believe the West has treated them in an unfair way. The West has deprived them of the technology for peaceful purposes. The West has sided with Saddam Hussein when Saddam invaded Iran, provided chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein. So they have a whole litany of history, of mistrust. And it's important that we use this opportunity. This opportunity has been provided to all of us by the Iranian people in the election. They chose the path of constructive engagement and moderation in Iran. And I think it's a unique opportunity that needs to be used, employed by everybody, by all sides, in order to build trust. I understand that some in the West may have a different narrative about our nuclear program. And based on that narrative, they find reason to have suspicions. There are alternative narratives. Our narrative is one that is based on the fact that Iran was denied access to technology for many years, that Iran's nuclear reactor, the research reactor that was built in Iran by the Americans, by the way, in the famous Atoms for Peace program of President Eisenhower. But unfortunately, the fuel for that reactor was not being provided to Iran. And each time Iran had to go through various channels which were less than dignified in order to simply get fuel for a research reactor. And we found out that the only way that we can do this is to rely upon ourselves. That is one narrative. Another narrative is the Western narrative why Iran would need fuel fabrication and fuel production and enrichment, whereas you can buy it at a cheaper price in international markets, but those international markets were not open to us. So it's an opportunity for Iran and the West to start rebuilding this mutual trust that we have lost in each other.
I understand it's really time to talk about the future as opposed to talk about the past. But of course, part of the mistrust is that in the past, the West, as we call it often, they got the feeling that Iran was not very forthcoming with regards to the information. For example, then enriching more uranium than Iran would have needed to actually use it for a research reactor. How do you address those?
Well, again, this is the same difference in narrative. Iran was less than forthcoming, you're right. Iran was discreet in its program. And the reason is very obvious. The minute we became transparent, all the avenues were closed. You see, Iran owns 10% share in Eurodif. We have paid for it. But we were not able to get a gram of uranium from Eurodif. We have a research reactor without fuel. So this is a problem which creates a psychology, which creates a need. You see, you're dealing with not with a new state, you're dealing with a government, a people, a state, a nation state that has millennia in its history, that believes empires are only short spans of time. For us, the United States, which has been the most prominent superpower for 50, 60 years, that's just a short period of time in the history as we look at it. So it's very difficult for Iranians to take orders from anybody. And that is why we cannot accept anybody to tell us that you cannot have access to fuel. You cannot have access to this technology. We have gone to very difficult processes of trying to acquire the technology ourselves, trying to make it homegrown, trying to build it. Of course, it's not economical. Of course, it's not feasible economically. But as opposed to what? As opposed to simply foregoing the option of having diversification of your sources of energy, or simply accepting somebody else's desires and whims to tell you what you can do and what you cannot do. So because of that, we've been forced into this. So it is important. Now that we look into the future, if we want to look at the past and examine the past, it is also important to try to look at it from the other side's perspective, not simply from one narrative.
But of course, at core of the discussion always has been the question whether Iran was aiming to actually build the bomb as well, not only use it for peaceful purposes. And the West saw some proof in some things that then were acknowledged only late by Iran, that, for example, there were secret facilities. You just explained why there were those secret facilities, but also the sheer number of uranium that Iran wanted to enrich to a 20% charges. Or also that other countries, like even the Soviet Union at one point, said that there is an offensive capability also in the mind or on the mind of the Iranians, and that's the reason why they actually want these capabilities and technology.
Well, we don't agree with that narrative. We had to make 20% enriched uranium because the research reactor in Tehran uses 20% enriched uranium. Interestingly enough, this research reactor, which was originally built by the Americans, was originally designed to use high enriched uranium, that is weapon grade. Then the Americans converted it after the revolution to something that would use medium enriched or low enriched uranium of 20%. But then they deprived Iran of access to that fuel. And in the early 2000s, we made it very clear, either provide us with the fuel or we will make it ourselves. So they didn't, and we made it.
But why would you need nearly 200 kilograms of enriched uranium of 20%?
Because at a certain stage, we stopped dealing with the needs, and the two sides started hurting one another. And they started, basically the West started imposing sanctions on Iran, and Iran started to create the necessary conditions so that its hands at the negotiating table in order to get out of these sanctions would be strengthened. The two sides started basically hurting one another. And that is what you get. You get a lot of sanctions, which hurt Iranian people, create resentment against the West among the Iranian people, and then you have a number of centrifuges. This is the equation that I like to give you, is that when sanctions started against Iran, Iran had less than 200 centrifuges with very little quantity of enriched uranium. Now, after 8 years of sanctions, Iran has over 19,000 centrifuges, and a lot of resentment among the Iranian population that if you want to even buy medicine in Iran from a foreign source, people are not prepared to open letters of credit for you because of American arms twisting with even European banks, preventing them from opening letters of credit for Iranian medical corporations buying European medicine for Iranian patients. So that is the picture as we see it now. At least the picture as was prevalent 4 months ago. Now, hopefully, we have started a new chapter. We agreed in Geneva with EU 3+3, Germany included, that we want to put a stop to that basically vicious cycle of trying to hurt one another and start trying to find a solution.
So probably some of the arguments will be validated during the negotiations, which will continue in February actually to find a long-term solution to the whole thing. But as you said, there is still mistrust on both sides. So how far would Iran be willing to go in order to rebuild the trust? And at the same time, what do you demand from the US and from the others that they go to rebuild the trust?
I think we basically crafted a map, a roadmap of how we go about doing this. The first step is the first step in the plan of action that we adopted together in Geneva. It's important for both sides to remain committed to their part of the bargain in the plan of action. not to try to misrepresent the plan of action, but rather try to implement what's there.
If I may, can I just explain it for our viewers so that they know what we are talking about? You basically agreed in Geneva that the 5% would be the enrichment that would be frozen right now. The 20% that is already there of uranium would be converted down. And number 3, that you would stop the construction at the heavy water reactor in Arak. While at the same time, some of the sanctions are being lifted and to negotiate over the next couple of months until July.
Well, not exactly. We agreed that not to enrich at 20%. We didn't agree to freeze anything at 5%. We agreed not to enrich above 5%.
Yeah.
We agreed not to install major components in Iraq. We didn't agree to stop construction of Iraq. We also agreed that we put certain transparency measures, new transparency measures, in order for the IAEA to be able to do it. Now, on our part, our actions are being verified by the IAEA, and it has already verified that we have taken steps to implement our side of the bargain. Now, it's important to see that the Europeans and the Americans are implementing their side of the bargain, which is the sanctions relief that has been agreed upon. Now, some parts have already been implemented. The European Union has adopted the decisions that it was supposed to adopt. Now it's up to various European actors to actually act upon that. The Americans have sent instructions to various banks that they will not impose restrictions on them for doing business with Iran. But it's important for them to be really true to their commitment and allow these transactions to take place. So it's a process, and in this process we can build confidence. Now, on the 18th of February, we will start negotiations in Vienna for a comprehensive solution. And those negotiations are going to be difficult on the one hand, but easy on another, because if the object of those negotiations, if the objective is to ensure that Iran's nuclear program will remain exclusively peaceful, that is exactly our objective. So it's not that difficult if you have a common objective to find ways and means of reaching that objective, provided that you go to these negotiations with an open mind, with the ability to deal with multiple answers to a single question, not to insist on a single answer to any particular question.
And yet I have to ask about some of the particulars of the negotiations. Would Iran be willing, with an open mind, to cut the number of centrifuges to 4,000, for example?
I'm not, as a matter of principle, I never negotiate on the air. But I can tell you that we are prepared to address the concerns, but not to dismantle any of our program. We have our own red lines, but we believe that within those red lines, it is possible to address the concerns. If the concerns are the breakout capability, there are a multitude of possibilities in order to deal with that. And that is why I said in the beginning that you should not believe there's only one set of answers for a given question. There are possibilities, various possibilities. You need to find, I mean, the two sides need to start sitting together and exploring various possibilities that address the requirements of both sides, not simply the whims and wishes of one side.
But
arbitrarily.
Yeah, I understand that. Obviously, you were on the record before in the last couple of months saying basically that Iran will not give up its capability for enrichment. That would be one of the red lines, as I understand it. And you are on the record saying that it will always maintain its capability to restart enrichment above 20% within 24 hours.
No, I didn't say that as a red line. I said that the current agreement, because it's a temporary agreement, it's just the first step. It's just a confidence-building measure. As the European and the Americans can decide to reimpose sanctions, we can revert back to enriching at 20%. This is not a red line. This is just the nature of the game at this stage. At this stage, the two sides have ensured that if there is a disagreement, because of the degree of mistrust, unfortunately, because of the degree of mistrust, the two sides have tried to put in place mechanisms so that if they see violations from the other side, and if there are no other possibilities and opportunities to redress those violations, then you can go back and you're not at a major disadvantage in order to go back to the situation that is status quo ante. So this is the bottom line, the worst case scenario. But that is not what we're aiming at. We're aiming at finding a solution that would make this temporary situation a permanent situation, at least a long-term situation, because after the long-term agreement, we will have an Iranian nuclear program that will be treated according to the Geneva Plan of Action in the same manner as the nuclear program of any other country. And we have seen the United States time and again accepting this premise that at the end of the day, once we implement this agreement, then Iran's nuclear program will be dealt with on the normal basis. So this is the aim that we are trying to get at. We didn't spend so much time just to have an agreement for 6 months. But these are contingencies. Unfortunately, because of the lack of trust,
you need some pressure points.
Because of the lack of trust that is so prevalent on both sides, each side has tried to preserve its options so that if the other side did not live up to its commitments, then it can be dropped.
You said before that, of course, both sides are hurting each other. That's one of the reasons why have been hurting each other. That's one of the reasons why actually now the talks are possibly taking place. How big of a hurting was that for Iran, given the fact that the economic sanctions really hurt the people of Iran?
Well, if you come to Tehran, you don't see a city under sanctions. Or if you go to any other major city in Iran, you don't see these cities under sanctions. Iran is a very wealthy country. We pay the premium. And that is why sanctions breed corruption. There are a multitude of ways to escape sanctions, to go around sanctions, and I believe people have been experts. There are a lot of experts in how to evade sanctions. A lot of people are making a lot of money doing this, and that is why sanctions, by definition, by their nature, inherently breed corruption in finding ways and means of evading sanctions. So if you come to Iran, you see a normal economy, probably the largest number of Porsche sedans in the streets of Tehran than any other capital in the region or even outside this region. But the fact is that we do not like this type of interaction. We like to have transparent, serious relations with the rest of the international community. We do not see why, if we want to buy medicine, we have to pay in cash. We believe that if you want to purchase from outside world, you can do through normal channels that everybody else is doing. Not that we were unable to get medicine, but we had to go through all these various ways of evading sanctions, and that made medicine much more expensive for patients who were in need, and some couldn't afford it.
President Rouhani, just at the World Economic Forum, invited the international community to come to Iran to bring investments, to invest into the country. But he made a distinction. He basically excluded Israel from it. And Israel and some of also the Arab states are very, very reluctant about these negotiations because they think that it's a huge deception by Iran trying to get out of the sanctions. How do you respond to that?
Well, we've told our Arab neighbors that our interest is in cooperation, confidence building, and greater security for all of us. We believe their security is our security. We've been on the record. I visited most of our neighbors and open to visit the others in order to make sure that we understand each other, that we can cooperate. I believe our commonalities, our common challenges, our common opportunities are far greater than what divides us. I believe the challenges that exist in our region today, in Syria, the challenge of extremism, the challenges that may actually have already gone beyond Syrian borders and are engulfing other countries. These are common challenges and require common solutions, and we are prepared to do it with our Arab friends. When it comes to Israel, we have made it very clear that they're trying to create a smokescreen behind which they could justify their violation of the rights of the Palestinian people. The problem in the Middle East, the problem in Palestine, is the fact that the rights of the Palestinian people are being violated, trampled upon, that there are more international resolutions from the Security Council, from the General Assembly, from Human Rights Council, from all bodies dealing with these issues. And this is simply an excuse, a smokescreen, behind which you can use this, they can use this as scapegoat in order to simply divert international attention from what is happening in those territories. And it may be useful for a period of time, but it will not solve the problem.
But if your assumption is that in order to advance, we have to sit down, talk about all those things, whatever should there be on the table, wouldn't it be time to then say, well, Israel is one of our neighbors?
It is not.
Israel is close to you. It's one of the regional countries.
No.
So why not recognize?
We have nothing that need to be discussed with them. We are happy in the neighborhood that we have. Our security is tied to the countries in the region. They have a different security concern. There are different issues involved there. We are not involved in that region. They should settle it among themselves. It's an issue that needs to be settled there. It's the rights, at the end of the day, it's the rights of the Palestinian people, which has been violated, continues to be violated for the past 60 years. I believe simply introducing extraneous issues to this very fundamental issue of human rights, issue of the right to self-determination, simply is a smokescreen which will hide the actual problem. And people are welcome to use smokescreens, but that will not resolve the problem.
Sir, with all due respect, I'm not talking about smokescreens, but you said that Iran actually feels, in the past at least, it felt threatened by Israel. Israel, on the other hand, feels threatened by Iran. Why not sit down at a table, maybe with some others who help with the negotiations, and sort out those differences?
No, again, Iran does not feel threatened by anybody. Iran does not accept, and I believe nobody else should, some countries to use illegal measures to threaten the use of force against others.
But President Ahmadinejad called for the annihilation of Israel. Isn't that a threat?
Those statements have never been made by this government. It is very clear that these are, the Netanyahu administration has used statements of that nature in order to create, again, the smokescreen for purposes to avoid addressing the real issues. Real issues, that is the deprivation of the rights of the Palestinian people. I believe when people can provide excuses, people can use those excuses, but excuses are different from solutions.
For the rest of the world, sir, it looks like a little bit of a disappointment, because many people were expecting from the new government in Iran that actually also there would be some movement on that question, because President Rouhani, for example, acknowledged, he congratulated Jews to the Jewish New Year.
I did too.
You did too. Actually, on the question of the denial of the Holocaust, which President Ahmadinejad was known for, you also are on the record saying that was, the former government. So is there a change? Would you go on the record and say, of course there was the Holocaust and millions of Jews have been...
Well, let me make it very clear. I come from a tradition where, according to Islamic scripture, the killing of one individual is unforgivable, let alone killing millions. A horrifying tragedy occurred, and it should never occur again. But that should not provide an excuse for violation of the rights of the Palestinian people. We have made it very clear. You know that Iran is host to the largest Jewish community in the Middle East outside Israel. Those Jews have representatives in the parliament. So when I congratulated the Jewish people around the world on Rosh Hashanah, I thought I was congratulating my own countrymen as well as other members of the Jewish community.
Do I understand you?
And I believe we have the greatest respect for Jews in Iran and outside Iran. We have nothing against the Jews, but we are against violations of people's rights. And we believe that no excuse could be used in order to trample upon the rights of the Palestinian people. Then let me turn this
argument around, sir. Would it be then fair to say, or would you agree that if the Palestinian question can be solved between Israel and the Palestinians, would then Iran be willing to recognize the State of Israel?
You see, that's a sovereign decision that Iran will make, but it will have no consequence on the situation on the ground in the Middle East. If the Palestinians are happy with the solution, then nobody outside Palestine could prevent that from taking place. The problem for the past 60 years is that the Palestinians have not been happy. The Palestinians have not been satisfied, and they have every right not to be satisfied because their most basic rights continue to be violated, and people are not ready to address those rights.
You addressed another issue in one of your answers. Syria, of course, is a major conflict in the region. It seems to really get totally out of control with now Sunni extremists fighting in Syria as well, and support from other countries for the fighters within Syria. There are about 7,000 to 11,000 foreign fighters. What would be Iran's suggestion of getting this situation under control?
Our suggestion would be for everybody to set aside political agendas and simply join our forces to bring the conflict to an end. This is our suggestion. We believe putting preconditions, saying this person should go and that person should come in, has prolonged this conflict for over 3 years. It was based on an illusion, illusions based on lies that were produced and fed into a good number of countries in the West. And the result has been that you have a continuation of a crisis which is only creating more victims, refugees, people under siege, as well as casualties, but large number of casualties. So what we need to do...
Can this be solved at the negotiating table, given the fact that Iran also has, for example, soldiers on the ground?
We don't have soldiers on the ground in Syria, but we were not invited to the negotiating table either.
The deputy commander of Al-Quds actually was on the record in an interview saying that there is an Iranian presence on the ground.
There is Iranian presence, but we don't have soldiers on the ground in Syria. There is a government in Damascus that is recognized by the United Nations, has a seat in the United Nations. So Iran has had historic relations with that government, and we continue to have relations with that government. Those who are supporting the terrorist elements that are also on the list of UN terrorist organizations, very dangerous people, people who are killing one another and beheading their own. I mean, it's not a Sunni-Shia rivalry. These are Sunnis killing Sunnis. These are extremists, takfiris, killing themselves, killing each other. So it's an unfortunate situation, and the only solution is to push for a ceasefire and then to help all Syrians to decide for themselves their future. Others outside Syria should not set the agenda. Others outside Syria should not set preconditions. Others outside Syria should not try to resolve their grudges or their strategic calculations in order to change the disequilibrium in the region after the Arab Spring through the blood of the Syrian people. We need to allow the Syrians to determine their future, and I do not think that's a hard proposition to make.
So Iran would be very open about the question whether Assad can stay or has to go?
It's not our decision. It's not the decision of Iran, nor is it the decision of the United States or Europe or anybody else. It's the decision that the Syrian people should make. Nobody else has the right to make that decision for them. And certainly, nobody else has the right to make that a precondition so that this war will continue for another 3 years and will engulf more human beings as its victims and will engulf more of the region as a theater for extremism and will create a threat to the entire international community.
But could Iran work as a catalyst to help along those negotiations between the Syrian parties there?
We were always ready to do that. Unfortunately, because of certain preconditions by certain influential factors, the United Nations could not take advantage of Iran's help, and they did it to their own detriment. But for Iran, Syria is an important neighbor, an important country in our region. We believe the consequences of this tragedy in Syria threatens everybody, and it's important for everybody to help in order to end it.
Sir, if it's possible, and if I could take a few more minutes, because I think the situation in Iran itself would be also very interesting for our viewers. Of course, we know that there are many, many young people in Iran. They seem to look for a changed Iran, a modern society with more individual rights as well. How about those individual rights, freedom of opinion, for example?
Well, look at Iran. It's the only country in the region, and I mean the only country in the region, where over the past 30 years, 4 times, a president has presided over the election of his opposition into office. 73% of the Iranian population participated in the election last year in June, and out of 6 candidates elected by an overwhelming majority, the candidate who was calling for moderation, for rights of citizens.
Absolute majority.
An absolute majority. So that's an important indication of the path Iran is going to. Now, you have a region which is almost engulfed in extremism, and you have a large country voting at the ballot box for moderation. That's something to celebrate. That's something to appreciate. Now, our human rights record can take a lot of improvement, as does the human rights record of almost any country. But there is a social mix in Iran. Iran is not a monolith. Nobody alone determines the future of Iran. It should be a national consensus, if you want. The reason we have been able to sustain this path, that you did not need military intervention in order to change governments. Governments change through the ballot box. It's because this has been a gradual process. It cannot be done overnight. There are different tendencies in the Iranian society. The very conservative elements who do not like the amount of access to free information, to the internet that we provide. And there are those who believe that the restrictions are excessive. So we need to build a consensus among these various forces inside Iran. Fortunately, I don't sit where I have to make the decision. That's a very tough decision to make. That's outside the purview of my responsibility. But I believe as a social scientist that we need to allow this process to take its shape so that whatever outcome we reach is a sustainable outcome, not an outcome that can be overturned by the next government, as we have seen, unfortunately, in many parts of our region.
What are the core things that the current government may be able to really accomplish? For example, there was the question of the opposition leaders who are still under house arrest. Wouldn't that be a great signal to show that freedom of opinion is valued more in Iran than in the past?
Well, the president made some commitments during his campaign, and he has said, as recently as in Davos, that he wants and he's committed to fulfilling those commitments. So that said, the decision on these issues is not for the executive branch. These are decisions that will be made by the judiciary, by other branches of the government.
And the Supreme
Leader.
Executive,
not necessarily. It's not that he makes these decisions. He sets the framework for the decision making. But it's a democratic process where various branches of government have their own constitutional responsibilities. So what we hope is that through the process, the administration, the executive branch can actually intervene, intercede, in order to reach a common understanding among various branches and lead to a different type of resolution of this issue.
Do you foresee any chance that in a society like Iran, where religion is something very important, and some countries have the same, but that religion is considered to be something more of an individual right, the individual choice, as opposed to something that has been or is chosen collectively?
We're dealing with 2 aspects of religion. One is the social dimension of the religion, And that you may have differences among various religions. Some religions have only private dimensions, some religions have social dimensions. Islam is one that has social dimensions. But the private decision of individuals, what to believe, how to exercise those beliefs in their private lives remains a matter for them to decide, like in any other society. But then you have the differences between a society that practices and preaches Islamic values and a society that does not. And these differences, again, it depends on your narrative. The narrative from Islamic societies, and it's important for you to take a look and see that the most sustainable form of democracy is something that is rooted in the beliefs of the population and not something that is imported from outside. That is why we have been able to sustain this much longer than any of our neighbors and any other Muslim society has been through imported remedies or through extremist remedies.
If I may, I would give you one example, one narrative actually as an example. In a recent newspaper article in Germany, a young woman from Iran, 26-year-old, she was quoted, she is very committed to religion. She's wearing the chador. She is supporting Islam as the most important thing in her life as well. But at the same time, she took part in the protests because she said that Islam is being used or misused for political purposes in Iran. So that's the reason why she took part in the protests. And then she says, I personally feel like a piece of wood with two dirty ends, and people don't want to touch it. She feels lost, she feels isolated in the Iranian society because the protest camp basically calls her a very conservative religious woman, and the conservatives call her, well, you are with the protesters. How do you solve this kind of problem?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Iran is not a monolith. You have a variety of views in Iran being expressed and finding possibilities for expression. And that is only natural for people who have various views, for people who believe that religion is being used for political purposes. A lot of people believe that. A lot of people believe that religion is an important part of society, and various groups, various political tendencies resort to that as a means of justification for their behavior. So is the Constitution. You see, various parties in the United States, for instance, use the US Constitution in order to justify their behavior. It's no different. So should we set the Constitution aside? Should we put it aside simply because some people try to take advantage of certain provisions in the Constitution for one aspect of their behavior, to justify one aspect of their behavior, and some other people use another provision in the Constitution to justify another aspect of their behavior? So that's how societies which are pluralistic, which allow people to exercise various opinions, to exercise various political options, operate. And that's only natural. I don't think that's a disaster for people to be able to participate in demonstrations with the chador, and people, the very large number of Iranian populace who supported former President Ahmadinejad and were not committed religious people. So you had across the board, and religion was not the dividing line. You see, President Rouhani is a cleric. He is a religious scholar, but at the same time, he received most of the votes among the most secular segments of Iranian society, and he received most of the votes, even larger amount of votes, in the villages where people tend to be religious. So these are artificial boundaries that we are setting in the Iranian society. Iranian society is a very dynamic society, and that's the beauty of it. Nobody can predict Iranian political elections. And that's nice.
Listening to you, you really sound like an American. You lived in the US for 24 years. And in the past, of course, it would have been name-calling if I would call you an American, at least from the past Iranian perspective. It was considered to be the big Satan, the empire of evil as well, and so on. But living in the US, and you acknowledge that, it was the greatest thing that you as an Iranian could live the Iranian way of life in the US. Do you think it would be possible or should be possible in your country, as you just seem to say, you should be able to live whatever way of life you choose. And there shouldn't be anyone, not even a supreme religious leader, telling you what to do.
Yep, basically the private lives of people in Iran. Iran is a different society than the United States. We have a different social environment. And there are different social rules. And these rules have become parts of our national legislation, the part of national code. For instance, the dress code in Iran, the way you behave in the streets in Iran. You have dress codes in all societies, various types of dress codes. So I don't think people will find very serious trouble having their private lives lived in Iran in the way they want. And a lot of people do it. If you're a religious person, you can have a very religious life. If you're not, you can have your own type of life as you wish in your home. In the streets, there is a social code that is applied in Iran. A different social code is applied here in Germany. A different social code is applied in the United States. So there is no society in which there is no social code. There are only differences. You may find ours excessive. Fine. I mean,
many do. Yes.
Many may find it, but many in Iran find the social code here immoral. I don't agree with them, but they do. So you're entitled to your opinion, they're entitled to their opinion, and at the end of the day, it's the majority of the populace who decide how their society should be run. And the majority of the Iranian population have been able, time and again, to determine their future at the ballot box, and we should celebrate that.
Finally, I'd like to ask you about one more of your opinions on the question of what role should Germany play in world affairs, because during the Munich Security Conference there was this word, the code word global Germany, coming from the Americans, or transatlantic renaissance, basically demanding from Germany to really take a much bigger part in world affairs. What is your expectation from Germany?
Iran and Germany have a long historical relationship, and that relationship has always been positive. So for us, Germany is an important partner, an important player in the global scene, but we see the way the global order has to be managed in a different way. We believe that we need to have a different approach to global governance. We believe that we need a new paradigm of dealing with global governance. We believe that the old paradigm is not effective anymore. And the way you need to deal with the new global order, because of globalization, because the fact that security has become globalized, you cannot have security for one part of the world, for one group of countries, at the expense of insecurity of others. So Germany and every other nation should participate in making a security network around the world in which everybody could benefit. And I believe Germany has an important role in that.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I think that there will be many things changing in the future. The question is if that change is long-term. And we will see what the negotiations in Vienna bring over the next couple of weeks and months. And I thank you very much, Minister Zarif, for sharing your thoughts with us and for your time and your frankness.
Thank you very much for having me, and I hope for the best.
We all do. Und ich danke auch Ihnen, liebe Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer, für Ihr Interesse am Kamingespräch von Phoenix aus dem Adlon Hotel in Berlin. Auf Wiedersehen.